Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. The Islamic State continues to thrive and establish itself as a power base in the Middle East, though it must be pointed out that its strength today is only the result of the West's habit of playing with jihadi groups who later turn on their masters. Is this intentional chaos or policy recklessness? To Crosstalk the Islamic State, I'm joined by my guest, Ramzi Baroud, in London. He is an author, journalist, and a political analyst. Also in London, we have Danny Maki. He is a researcher on Middle East affairs, as well as host of the political debate show Syria Talks. And in Washington, we cross to Mohammed Ghanem. He is a Syrian political activist, as well as a policy and government relations director with the Syrian American Council. All right, gentlemen, Crosstalk rules. In fact, that means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much encourage it. Ramzi, if I can go to you first in London, the Obama administration is at sea. It has no idea how to deal with the Islamic State or ISIS or whatever you want to call it on this program. But it's what surprises me even more is the fact that they don't have a policy. Is that we watched it come into being from the very, very beginning and even predicted its outcome, what it could morph into. So how do you think they should proceed? They knew this was going to happen, and they just watched.
I think this has to be seen within a larger context, Peter, in the sense that the Obama administration retreated from Iraq under the pressure of the resistance there, and also because circumstances in the region have changed. Then you have the Arab Spring. Again, the Americans were checked out of the region. They were retreating, and their repute and their leadership was no longer as effective, and they were no longer as intimidating as they used to be in the past. Then the situation in Syria, an uprising turned civil war, and ISIS came to the scene. And the question is, how does ISIS factor in all of this? I do think in my mind that the Americans had a hand in the creation of ISIS, either directly or indirectly through their regional allies in the Gulf and in Turkey. The idea was they wanted to topple or to speed up the toppling of the Assad regime. They did not believe that the opposition there that started the uprising really had what it takes to take on Assad. And therefore, they needed to finance and deal with brutes such as al-Nusra and ISIS and others in order for them to get the job done. It might have started as that intentional chaos, but with time it turned into a situation that even the Americans themselves cannot possibly handle.
Okay, Mohammed, so is it intentional chaos or just policy recklessness, as I said in the introduction of this program?
The AQ, Al-Qaeda, is undoubtedly the product of the ill-fated and ill-planned invasion of Iraq. But the rise of ISIS, it was mainly because we sat back, United States of America sat back, and Russia, of course, they sat back and allowed the Assad regime to slaughter tens of thousands of civilians. They allowed the power vacuum to emerge. And then when the rebels in early 2014, the same rebels that your guest was talking about, that they were unable to do much, those rebels actually drove ISIS, like ISIS was on the ropes in early 2014. They besieged them in their de facto international capital of Raqqa. But then they did nothing. They missed a lot of opportunities when Assad barrel-bombed the rebels in their rear lines.
Okay, all right,
and the
Mohammed,
rebels had to
well, I guess, maybe we could get short. No, but you're just saying that the rise of ISIS is Assad's fault and Russia's fault. So is that, in a few words, what you're saying?
Is that what you're saying?
Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's
really?
Assad for sure, and the United States of America not supporting the ISIS main opponents that are the Syrian rebels.
Okay, Danny, how do you factor in all of this here? Again, there's been released documentation from the Pentagon and military intelligence that they watched this group come to being. They knew it all along. They know who was funding it. They know who was giving it encouragement. They know the countries. They know the elites. And they watched. Does that give you confidence they know how to deal with the next step in dealing with ISIS?
It's impossible. I mean, we cannot lose sight of the fact that ISIS is ultimately the product of a failed, damaging and interventionist US policy within the region. This started off with the Iraq War, which directly led to the creation of the Islamic State of Iraq, which ended up as ISIS. Now, the United States of America have viewed that fighting ISIS is the best way to be done through arming Syrian rebels. Now, it is the fact that the US has intervened on the side of the rebels and has used its regional partners and allies to arm these militant groups who have all ended up into being ISIS and Al-Nusra Front. And these US weapons which have been sent to these rebel groups within Syria have ended up in the hands of Al-Qaeda groups. Now, this has bolstered ISIS, it has bolstered Al-Qaeda, and it is part and parcel as to why ISIS emerged so poignantly in the first place. This is because Obama has lacked a coherent foreign policy, and the comprehensive counterterrorism project which they had to fight insurgencies and Al-Qaeda within the Middle East has been based on something which is wrong, and that is a policy which is bankrupt. Now, what the United States needed to do was to have regional partners who did not fund extremism, to have regional partners who are not actually helping terrorism and terrorists themselves. So this is down to the US policy within the Middle East as a whole, and the fact that the United States' regional allies are actually ideologically aligned with ISIS. So when the United States has a coalition to fight the Islamic State, and its own allies have the same ideology of the Islamic State and have funded Islamic State affiliated groups within the Middle East, then this is clearly going to be a contradictory foreign policy.
All right.
Now, regardless of how Assad has fought ISIS or barrel bombs, watch one comment on this. ISIS's main enemy has been Assad. They've killed hundreds of Syrian soldiers. They've massacred them and put them on YouTube for the whole world to see. The main victim of ISIS terrorism have been pro-government soldiers. This is clear for the whole world to see by the admission of even the Western mainstream
That
media.
is absolutely not true, by the way. That is absolutely not true.
This is crosstalk.
Listen, Peter.
Mohammed,
Peter, the rise of ISIS,
I'm going to actually I'll go to you right now. All right, Mohammed, would you like to react in a calm way what Danny just said? Go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. Listen. Yes, sure. So, Peter, listen, the rise of ISIS and who ISIS is targeting is not a matter of opinion. It's not about my politics and your politics. So let's examine the facts. What your guest said is absolutely not true, and it's unfounded. According to IHS Janes, and it's like a very well reputed counter-terrorism center based in London, they examined ISIS attacks against the Syrian regime and the opposition in 2014. Only 6% of Assad's so-called counterterrorism operations targeted ISIS, and only 13% of ISIS attacks targeted the Assad regime. And both groups, Assad and ISIS, were targeting the Syrian rebels. The main reason why ISIS has emerged in Syria is because we let the Syrian rebels down. They are ISIS' main targets. They are the Assad regime's main target.
Okay,
and
all right,
they are the only group on the ground.
You've already said this on this program. Let me go to Ramsey.
I'd
like to go to Ramsey in London here. I think, it'd be fair to everyone and our viewers here is the origins of ISIS come from the ill-fated invasion, illegal invasion of Iraq in 2003 and the destruction of that country's infrastructure, security forces, military, etc., etc. Throwing it in the lap of Assad is very short-sighted, at least in my opinion. Go ahead, Ramsey.
I do agree. However, I do think that there is culpability on the part of all the parties involved. Okay. The Syrian regime, of course, but also Gulf countries, Turkey, the United States, that allowed the situation to reach the tragic end that it has reached as of today, where ISIS is in control of territories in both Syria and Iraq, where they rule over nearly 6 million people. Now, it's one issue to actually try to find the roots of ISIS, and I do not think that the roots of ISIS really go to any organic phenomenon, meaning historically we can't really claim that ISIS was an outcome of an existing whatever collective anger or frustration with the regime in Syria. This is something that was planted within the existing revolution and civil war in Syria, and was planted by parties that are very well known. Even the Vice President of the United States himself has insinuated or rather declared that specific parties are in fact funding and arming and supporting those terrorist groups. And I don't think there's really any argument regarding that. But the fact that some of the guests are talking about the United States rather getting involved they need to do something, they need to take action, as if the United States was not the party that created that mess in the first place.
Okay,
as if the United States was not...
The United States of America has done nothing. The United States of America has done nothing to help the situation in Syria except humanitarian relief.
Okay.
That's it. They've done nothing.
All right, Danny. Danny.
Do you know that 80% of U.S.-led coalition strikes in Syria were in or around, according to CENTCOM, they were in or around the town of Kobani, a small town with a pre-war population of 50,000 only in a country with a pre-war population of 23 million? Do you know that ISIS traversed hours through the open desert to reach Palmyra, Tadmor, before they captured Palmyra?
Exactly.
And the U.S.-led coalition did not strike them?
Okay, Danny, jump in. Danny, jump in. Go ahead, Danny, jump in.
Ultimately, this justifies the narrative that ISIS is the one fighting the Assad regime. ISIS attacked Palmyra, which is a World Heritage Site controlled by Assad government forces.
The Assad regime is buying oil from ISIS. The Assad regime is empowering ISIS through lucrative oil
Mohammed,
deals.
let Danny finish his point. Let Danny. I interrupted for you, Mohammed. Now, please listen to Danny. Go ahead.
The ultimate fact is that ISIS are the Syrian rebels. The majority of Syrian rebels defected to create a new version of ISIS, and now you have al-Nusra Front in Syria, which is a very similar group to ISIS, which is currently being funded by Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Turkey. But let me get to one point. Barack Obama stated that the threat of ISIS is medium to longer term, and he recently said he doesn't have a strategy to deal with ISIS. Now we take this into account, judging by the fact that ISIS control land bigger than the United Kingdom and a population of 6 million under its control, then the Syrian rebels would be impossible to fight ISIS, even if they were given all of the weapons and arms in the world. 2 governments have been fighting ISIS and have been unsuccessful. A group of Syrian rebels it would be inconceivable to think that they could defeat ISIS.
Sir, this is not an intellectual exercise about what
Gentlemen, I have to jump in here. We're going to go to a short break. And after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on the Islamic State. Stay with our team.
I know CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News have taken some knocks lately, but the fact is I admire their commitment to cover all sides of a story, just in case one of them happens to be accurate.
That was funny, but it's closer to the truth than you might think. Because when politicians and the mainstream media work side by side, the joke is actually on you. At RT News, we have a different approach.
LOL.
Because the news of the world just is not this funny.
I'm not laughing, damn it, I'm not laughing.
You guys stick to the jokes, we'll handle the news.